The first apartment that we lived in, I'm not going to say their name because I don't have too many good things. The memories were great, but the actual building itself was nothing to write home about whatsoever. It was bug infested. It was dirty. It was decades old. I mean, they were just bugs on top of bugs on top of bugs. I had an old journal entry where I was writing, hey man, I moved into my first apartment. I'm finally living on my own. I'm excited for what the future holds. And I even referenced in there that I had saw a bug crawling up the wall while I was like spending my first night in this new place. And I was like, that was weird, but hopefully it's not a sign of things to come. And little did I know it was just the tip of the iceberg. Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. Last week, we talked about the fact that June is National Homeownership Month. And so I took that episode of that first week to kind of go into detail about my personal home buying story and all that went into that. And I felt that it was important this week for me to go into a little more detail into my rental story and everything that transpired with that. And obviously, with a lot of people who are listening to this podcast, maybe having the goal of owning a home someday, more often than not, that likely means that you're currently renting. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about the current situation that we are in the rental world, and my personal experience in renting in this area in the Triangle. It was definitely sobering to kind of go through and look at the information that as I was preparing for this particular episode. But I think that it's really important for you guys to get a feel for what is happening out there in certain areas. Now, granted, this is also based on Raleigh, but I felt like that gave a good picture of kind of what has happened or gone through changes certainly in the Triangle area. For myself, I mentioned I've lived in Raleigh since 1996, and so I've seen all the different changes. I went to state, so I was still in Raleigh, and I realized when I was putting this all together that ever since I've moved out of my parents' house, every place that I have lived has had a Raleigh address. And so it's very interesting. I've been in South Raleigh. I've been in East Raleigh. I've been in North Raleigh. I've been just all over the place and stuff. And so I wanted to explain kind of what all of those different experiences were like and how all that changed. And so when I first moved out of my parents' home, it was for college, and it was my junior year of college. I finally had gotten a job while I was still in school and had something that I was able to use to kind of parlay into getting an apartment. I had needed roommates. Obviously, I couldn't afford to pay for something by myself, but I had two different friends that were roommates of mine, and I'd gotten a job at a local hotel. Well, not a local hotel for me, but it was in Chapel Hill. So interestingly enough, I was in rival territory working at their hotel out at the Sheraton as a shuttle driver and working at the front desk of that hotel. And I was also working at a restaurant. Some of you may know Frankie's Fun Park that's out in Raleigh, out by Briar Creek area. Worked as a server over there. Before it used to have a more defined restaurant area that was a full service area, and they had servers and waiters and everything like that. And so I waited tables there, and I was also working at the hotel. And the meager little bit of money I made from those two jobs, I kind of combined to help pay my part of the rent every month. And so the first apartment that we lived in, I'm not going to say their name because I don't have too many good things. The memories were great, but the actual building itself was nothing to write home about whatsoever. It was bug infested. It was dirty. It was decades old. I mean, they were just bugs on top of bugs on top of bugs. I had an old journal entry where I was writing, hey man, I moved into my first apartment. I'm finally living on my own. I'm excited for what the future holds. And I even referenced in there that I had saw a bug crawling up the wall while I was like spending my first night in this new place. And I was like, that was weird, but hopefully it's not a sign of things to come. And little did I know it was just the tip of the iceberg. That place was so bug infested, man. It was just, we would be watching movies with friends and you'd see a bug climbing up the wall. We'd see bugs every time. I still have PTSD of walking into a dark room and turning on lights because I'm always waiting for like the roaches and stuff to scatter because of my experience in that first place. And so it was crazy. And as many bugs and things that I saw, the thing you have to keep in mind too is that we were in the third floor apartment. And so I don't even want to imagine what the people on the first floor were going through. But like I said, we just had a time there with that place. And it was nothing special at all. But it was a large 3-bedroom apartment that had even a study off to the side of it. And it was something where it was just like there was nothing else that offered that level of space and that convenience to the campus, whatever. But it was one of the crappier places that I have ever lived. And it's hilarious that was my first experience living away from home. Outside of like not something that was a dormitory or something that was housing provided by the university. I always joke with people, again, I'm not going to say their name, but usually if they have a really fancy name, it's a good chance that it's probably going to be a dump. Like if you feel like you need to say their name with a British accent, more often than not, that place is probably going to be really crappy. Like if it says like Ellington Manor or Butimus Park or something like that, it's more than likely going to be a crappy place. And I learned that the hard way staying in that first place. So that was my first college rental. And that one, when I stayed there, was anywhere from about, I believe it was about $800, like mid 800s for the rent there. That was split between the three of us. And like I said, it went up. We stayed there for a few years and it went up gradually, whatever. But I looked up the rent for that place. And this was well over like 15 years ago, whatever. But I looked up the rent present day. That rent for that apartment, right, that had the bugs and stuff like that too. And this wasn't something where it was like you just need to get an exterminator and come treat it and it'll be fine. No, like these bugs are in the walls. The only way you're getting rid of these bugs is to tear that place down altogether. But present day, they still have not torn it down. So present day, bugs and all, that place is going for $1,860 a month. Right. And so that is how drastically the rents have changed right now. And I always tell people, too, if the pandemic or the 2020 had happened when I was still in college, I don't know what I would have done. Because like I said, I was working at a restaurant and a hotel. And so all of my income would have ceased to end. And I would have just been struggling tremendously during that time. But that was happening during that point. So that rent now has increased over $1,000 over the years, and that for that same type of place, right? We moved eventually from there to a nicer place, and this place was nicer. It was still close to the school and everything like that, and the rent only increased to like maybe like $1,000 or $1,100. And this was a much cleaner place. Again, we had pretty low standards, but I don't recall killing any bugs there or anything like that. Like it was a much newer place. It had been built within the last decade when we moved in. And it was a nice place that we very much enjoyed, that had all our needs. And again, 3 bedrooms. It wasn't as large as the other one, but it was fine with us. I would gladly give up that space if it means I don't have to kill roaches every time I go to get a glass of water. But that one, funny enough, in today's market, it still is not listed as high as the Roach Motel, right? It's like $1,850 a month, whatever, which is still a tremendous, it's like a $700 jump in the rents, but it's still not nearly as bad as what I was expecting. But that is how it's changed over the years. When I got married, we moved to a little apartment that was in North Raleigh. It was old, but again, it wasn't bug infested. There were no issues with that. It was a great location, and we loved that little apartment. It was nothing to write home about as far as like the amenities, the updates, and like that. Like it was still decades old, but it served all of our purposes. It was a nice, cozy little apartment that was in a great location for us, and I loved that place. If they had 3-bedroom units, we probably would have lived there all the way up until we ended up buying a home ourselves. But that was a place that we enjoyed living. The rents were right around the mid 800s when we lived there for that 2-bedroom. I looked today, and this was about 10 years ago, and I looked today to see what the rents are going for, and on the lower end, they're at like $1,550. And so that rent there has almost doubled in the 10 years since. A lot of that due to location and stuff too, but that has risen dramatically as well. Wages have not kept up with it. How quickly these rents have risen in these different areas. And the last place that we lived before we finally went on into home ownership was a townhouse style apartment, right? So it looks like a townhouse that is traditional, that would typically be just for sale or for you to purchase, but it was an apartment style setup in the way that it was rented out. And that one was a 3-bedroom townhome, about maybe a little less than 1,500 square feet. Again, decades old. They had a few critters there, but again, nothing as bad as that original place that I first started. So everything from there was pretty much a move up in my mind. But that townhouse was usually around, I think it was about $1,200 a month for that townhouse. And I looked present day, and it's going for about $1,770. Now, granted, that was only like maybe about a 4 years time span difference in that. Well, actually, I'll take that back, about 6 years. But that did not have as drastic of a change because there was a less time span in there. But the point of the matter is that it's still $1,770 for something that is not fancy, has no upgrades, still very outdated, but it's still in a decent location. It was still right in the heart of Raleigh. It was still in North Raleigh. And so those were the main places that I was living and kind of making things work out and everything like that, and getting my process of learning how to budget, how to live on my own, how to go through all of that. Like I said, renting is really buying patience, as Dave Ramsey says. It's getting you prepared for that opportunity to purchase that home. And I had plenty of years of experience just getting used to that. Every single one of those places I lived at, they all gradually went up on the rents as we were staying there. You know, they always have the promotional discounts that get you in the door, and then they start like ticking up the rents over and over. And then like every year you're having to determine like, do I want to move? Do I want to stay here? My wife and I were even saying the other night, like it was so weird for us, this being like our third year living in our home. We're like, oh, wow, like we haven't had to think about moving every year, because that was something that was on the table when you were renting every single year. It's like, do I want to move? Do I want to stay? Do I want to pay this increase that they're about to charge? What has my experience been like here? Like every single year you were having to re-sign that lease and decide whether or not you wanted to go through the hassle of moving, or if you just wanted to pay a little bit more or try to move down the street to get their promotional discount. Like it was just a constant, you never really had a chance to just relax and stay calm and steady with where you are. And that is, for me, has been one of the major benefits to home ownership, is just that peace and that steadiness, and having a constant in place where you're not having to constantly worry about how things are going to change from time to time. But those are my personal rental stories. I never personally got into residential rentals. Residential rentals is essentially where someone is renting out their house or their townhouse or whatever it may be to other people, where it's not like a traditional apartment complex or anything like that. And those are really the wild, wild west, right? Although I have not lived in one personally, I have helped a lot of people move into them, especially when I was first starting out in my career. And there were some crazy things that I have seen over the years with residential rentals, because there's not a ton of safeguards in place to really make sure that that industry is policed well. Right. So if you go to sell your house, for example, you have the option to sell it on your own, in which case there's not really much regulations or things in place. It's just you can put a sign in the yard and see if someone will write up a contract on it and sell it that way. Right. So there's not a lot of things that you have to adhere to. There's not a lot of issues or things that you need to know, which can cause a lot of problems. Right. But there's not a lot of safeguards in place with that process. If you hire a realtor, realtors, we have a real estate license, and either through our realtor designation or through our real estate license, we have a lot of safeguards and rules in place to help make sure that we are doing our jobs correctly, right? And so if you're using a realtor, there are safeguards and things that are put in place to make sure that everything is done on the up and up. With residential rentals, it's essentially the same way, in the sense that if you go out and just do it on your own, there's really no safeguards in place. There's nothing to stop me from waking up tomorrow morning and say, you know what, I think I want to rent out my house, and just going on Google, looking up a standard boilerplate rental lease agreement and using that and trying to like rent out my property. There's nothing to stop me from doing that. And I would have no idea of all the rules and regulations that I should be trying to stay within, because I can just go out and do whatever I want. And so that's why it's so scary with so many of these rentals out here. You see so many scams happening, so many issues with people getting accurate or concrete information, or even knowing whether or not a place is still available. It's a very difficult world to try to navigate. I remember one time I was showing a rental to somebody, and we pulled up to go take a look at the house. The lockbox was on the door, and I was going to get the key. I got the key out of the lockbox. I went to open the door, and I was like, actually, because I had beat them there. And so I thought to myself, I'll just wait until they get here, and then I'll open the door. That way we can all walk in together and kind of get a look at the place. And I'm so glad I didn't open the door because right as my client was pulling up, another car pulled into the driveway, and they were irate. They were like, who are you? What are you doing here? Like, this is my house. This is my apartment. Apparently what had happened is the landlord had already signed a lease with someone. They had given them the keys. Like, that was their rental. They were living there now. That was all set up. But they did not make any changes in the MLS. They didn't take it off of showings, and they didn't mark that it had been rented out. They didn't do any of that. And so we had set up an appointment, had the keys, and were ready to go show this place that was already owned by somebody else. And so that's just one story of many showing just how wild it is in residential rental games, and why there's so many things that you have to be careful of, why you need to make sure that you are vetting the landlord just as much as they're vetting you, right? Like, you need to make sure that you understand what this person's motivation is behind renting. You need to send them questions, right? Ask them how long they've been a landlord. Ask them if they have any reviews or testimonials from past tenants. Ask them all that, right? If you're about to give them thousands of dollars or sign an agreement with them to stick with them at least over the next year, you want to make sure that you have a firm understanding of who they are as well. So just keep that in mind. But one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to play like a little game, essentially. Wasn't a fun game because, like I said, it was sobering in determining just the way the housing crisis has really skyrocketed over the years. But I said, all right, let me just see, because, again, people are always in your ear saying, oh, you shouldn't rent, you're throwing your money away, all these different things, whatever, as scare tactics to get people to rush into a decision before they're ready. And so I wanted to see just kind of what things would look like for people who are looking in the market right now, right? So I took the average of the 3-bedroom rentals that I personally lived at myself, right? So those 3 different places I talked about that had 3 bedrooms, I took the average of those 3 rents, present day, and it came out to about $1,826, right? And so I said, all right, so let me take that payment, that average payment for a 3-bedroom in Raleigh, And let me pretend as if it was a mortgage payment, right? And so let's factor in principal and interest. Let's factor in taxes, insurance. If you're rushing into buying instead of renting, you likely don't have much of a down payment at all. I still did 3% down payment just as something, but more often than not, like if people are rushing into it, they may have no down payment at all and just trying to use 100% financing or something like that. But I said, let me just do a 3% down payment, which means that you still have PMI tacked on to your mortgage insurance. And I said, what would that 1826 get me? What would my purchasing power be with that? And with today's rates, that had me right around $225,000. Now, granted, there's a lot of other factors that take into place, like what the taxes may be or what insurance rates are. But for the sake of the game, let's just pretend 225 is what we had to work with for that payment. If you were to search for Raleigh 3-bedroom homes at $225,000 or less, right now, as of this morning, there were 3 properties that showed up that fit that description. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't being super descriptive. I wasn't weeding out a bunch of options. I just said, show me 3-bedroom homes in Raleigh at $225,000 or less. It gave me 3 properties. 2 of those properties were condos, which basically is almost like an apartment that you can own, and essentially, right? Where you don't own the land that it sits on. You don't own the exterior of that home. With condos, all you own is the space inside the walls, which means the HOA dues are often significantly higher for those properties. In this case, the HOA dues for these 2 properties was just under $400 a month, right? And these were properties that were built in the 70s. And so, like I said, that is kind of what you're working with as far as like active properties in that time. So those 2 of those were condos, and you figure if you take a HOA payment of $400 and you factor that into the purchase price, you could probably afford a $300,000 house if you can afford those HOA dues. And so that's just one thing like you're working with as far as like the pricing is. So there's 2 condos, and then there was one single family home that fit that description in Raleigh, but there were no interior photos, which is usually a telltale sign that whatever is inside, it ain't anything to write home about. It's probably going to be a significant fixer-upper. It's going to need a lot of work done on it, right? So 3 properties is all you had to work with. If you tried to take any of those payments and, like I said, put it towards a home, you don't have a ton to work with. And so while rental prices are crazy, they're not crazy enough to rush you into purchasing a home before you're ready, right? You want to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, that you have everything situated, that you've built up your emergency fund, that you've built up your down payment and all those things before you rush into it, right? Because while wasting or essentially quote unquote wasting time going through that process, you're actually saving money, you're saving expenses, you're saving putting yourself in a position to build up mountains of debt trying to get a house, right? Because that's what often happens is people will rush into purchasing a home, and they'll be excited because they're like, oh, this is great, I'm saving money, I'm investing in this house, right? I'm building equity, but things will happen, life will happen where they will eventually reach a point where they are now having to take on debt to stay in that house, right? Either for repairs for that house, they're having to take on debt for other things that happen that they didn't foresee. They're having to take on all types of debt to make that property work out or to make that situation work out for them. And the debt outweighs the savings or the equity that they're building on the back end, right? And so you're actually working yourself into a hole because you were rushing into that decision. And so I just wanted to put those things out there, give you some concrete numbers that you can really look at to kind of see where we stand, what the picture looks like. I always tell people, again, don't rush into this decision. Part of the reason I'm doing this podcast is that I want to help make sure that you have everything in order, that you have the knowledge you need, you have the processes in place, that you have tips for saving, that you have tips for increasing your income. We want to make sure that you have everything in place so that you're not putting yourself behind the 8 ball or into a hole trying to rush into things. So I hope that that's helpful for you all. Again, we're going to be right back here again next week talking about more things to keep in mind. But that's just something you want to focus on and learning about how things work in this market and how it can help. So hope that it's been helpful for you. As always, I hope I'm looking forward to working with you all through this process and through this journey. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I'll talk to you next time.